Thistle Verse, and today I'm going to be talking about how I rate on Goodreads. So, I don't know if I really talked about my rating system before. I don't really use the stars on my channel. For me, it's just kind of like, do I recommend it? Do I not recommend it? Do I recommend it with caveats? And I feel like that's more helpful. I feel like that's just like more natural and organic to how I think about what I'm reading. But I am on Goodreads. I don't know how many people follow me on Goodreads, but I'm there if you want to check me out. I'm also on the Story Graph if you want to follow me there. I'm Thistle and Verse on both platforms. I'll put the link to my profiles in the description box below. But I had seen, I think it was Literature Science Alliance and Chronicles of Noria had done videos talking about how they rated on Goodreads, and I thought that I would just do that as well. It might be interesting to talk about. So first I thought I should start off by talking about like what I read and like what I like in a story, and then that will kind of make my whole rating system make a little bit more sense. So for those who are new to the channel, my focus is on science fiction and fantasy by Black authors. That's like 90% of what I read. I do read some horror. I might read some contemporary or like historical fiction, but like I generally try to read stuff by Black authors like all the time, like for this channel. That was a reading habit I started before I had the channel. I'd been reading like that for like a year, maybe 2 years before I set up this channel. It was just kind of like something I did cold turkey. Like I had been reading, not really thinking about the race of the author or like what I was reading up until like high school. Then high school to college, I just stopped reading because I didn't have time. And then when I started it back up again, like Black Panther had just come out. There's a lot of talk about like Afrofuturism. There's a lot of like reading lists available. And I was like, oh wow, like I loved fantasy as a kid. I loved historical fiction and stuff like that. And like how many of those books by Black authors did I read? How many of those books featuring Black characters did I read? Not very many, which is interesting because like I did sort of try to read diversely in my own way. Like I really did like folklore from all over the world, history from like all over the world and from different groups of people. Like I loved those was it like the Dear America Journal series, the Royal Diary series, even the ones that featured like Black characters, like the picture books. Like when I was a kid, I think a lot of those were written by white people. So that's changed me like 3 years ago. I'd been reading like that for a year and a half, and then I started the channel. For me, it was just like important to feel like I had a purpose. I was very nervous in getting on YouTube about dealing with things like harassment. I'm not someone who's really big on like putting myself out there, talking to strangers and all that. And so like if I didn't feel like I had like this greater purpose, like, oh, I want people to know more like science fiction and fantasy by Black authors, I probably wouldn't have gotten on here. And also after a lot of prodding from Ninjari of Onyx pages, I definitely wouldn't have gotten on here. I think I need that in the forefront less now to get the will to film, but I think it's still like an important like guiding thing I want to have. That seems pretty straightforward for like novels, but like what does that look like for comics? What does that look like for short story anthologies? For the comic, even if the author isn't Black, if the main artist is Black, I still featuring it on my channel. For multi-author anthologies, I hadn't really thought of it, but I had seen an author, I think it was Milton Davis, point out that like Black authors are very important, but also Black editors are very important. And so for me, if I'm looking for like multi-author anthologies, well, so far I've only reviewed ones with at least one Black editor. And in terms of like how many contributors do I also want to be Black, I usually do like 20%. Like that's not a hard rule. I reviewed some books on my channel with authors where like I don't know their race. But that's like generally what I try to keep in mind when I'm thinking about what I want to review on here and what I want to focus on here. It's not that I never read stuff by authors that aren't Black, it's just like kind of rare. I probably just wouldn't feature it on the channel or on the Goodreads just because like for Goodreads I do try to leave reviews for everything and it's just like more work. I feel like my rating system's kind of contradictory because I feel like it's like there's a lot of fluff, there's a lot of wiggle room in how I rate on Goodreads, but like I feel like I have like high standards. Like I want to be wowed, I want to like really love every book that I read because I am like pretty intentional about what I pick out, and I definitely want to see like new things, like new ideas, like new characters, new locations. It's kind of like a downer when I read a book and I'm like, oh, like I feel like I've seen this plot line before. Like this is just this other book light. Like, I don't like it when I read stuff that feels derivative. Like, it's fine if something is like a trope that's being reinvented, or if it's like a retelling or something like that. But I want to see like the new thing. Like, I really want to be focused on the new angle. I'm not someone who really does the half stars. It's just, I don't feel like dithering about, is it a half star situation? Is it not? I kind of just go with like my gut, my first instinct, and I just like leave it be. I feel like the review itself is where like the meat of like what I think about it is. And so I try not to sweat about the stars too much. So for me, like if I see like a book that has like 3 stars or less on Goodreads, like I'm very wary of picking it up. So I think that also influences how I rate. Editing Chloe here. To make it plain, that means that if there's a situation where I feel like the book was half a star, I typically round it up, except for 4.5 star books. 4.5 star books, I just put as 4 stars on Goodreads. I really keep 5 star books for like the books that like I thought really just blew it out of the water. And for me, I'm someone who tends to like faster paced books. It doesn't have to have a whole lot of twists and turns. Character based stuff can be fine, but like I'm kind of picky about ones where it's like more like broody when it does that. If it's gonna be character based, I generally prefer like a more bubbly, like upbeat tone. There are some tropes that I don't like. Like I don't like prophecy says you have to get this magical object and then everything's solved. Like I generally like the tools that people like go after to like not just be a magical cure-all. I don't really like the love triangle trope. And in terms of things that I really like, I do really like stories about nature. I do really like stories that have a base in folklore or that feature deities. I really like stories that are sapphic. I'm not someone who super focuses on characters. Like, I can't name too many characters off the top of my head that I was like, I'm so protective of you. Like, this is like a favorite character ever. I'm like more interested in like the plot and the lore and the world itself than the characters. I'm pretty decent at guessing like the ends of the book or like the twists. Like I'm not always right, but I kind of have a feel for it. Like I don't always dock, points if I'm able to guess an outcome, but if the story is like hinging on a certain reveal and it's like really obvious what the reveal is going to be and like there's nothing else of interest going on, then I do tend to dock it points. When I'm rating and using the star system, it's mostly based on enjoyment, like how engaged was I with the book and how likely am I to reread it. So I have different rating systems for like different types of media. So for novels, graphic novels, and standalone short stories, 4 stars is like my go-to rating. 4 stars is like I enjoyed it, this was fun, I did not regret reading this, and it's kind of up to the story to either gain or lose stars from there. 5 stars is like stellar, it's like amazing, like this is like a favorite book, like one that I would love to buy and like own. This is possibly a formative book for me. This is like a book that's making me rethink the genre. Like this is like a game-changing book. 3 stars is like an okay. I considered DNFing at some point, but I pushed through and I like wasn't mad that I didn't DNF. 2 stars is that I considered DNFing and I really should have DNF'd. I'm kind of mad that I didn't. And 1 star is like atrocious, it's terrible, maybe it had like some bigoted storylines. For me, the difference between 1 and 2 stars is honestly kind of negligible. When I see either of those ratings on Goodreads as like an average rating, I'm like, I'm not picking it up. Then I have a different rating system for single issue comics because it's basically like a chapter of a graphic novel. Like there's a whole lot less space and there's only so much that can happen. I do buy single issue comics, and when I'm buying the single issue comics, I'm in a different mindset than when I'm reading the graphic novel. With the single issues, I'm thinking like, based on how this is going so far, am I going to maintain my subscription? Like, do I want to buy the next single issue or do I want to just wait until my library gets the graphic novel? And then for the comics, it's basically, it starts at 5 stars and then like each time I kind of like wonder if I should drop it, I dock a star. And depending on how big my concerns are, I might dock several stars at once. And once I hit like 2 issues where I'm giving them 3-star ratings like in a row, I'm not gonna keep up my subscription. I'm gonna drop it. By the time I got to a 2-star rating for an issue, I would definitely drop my subscription. And then for short story anthologies, it's a little tricky because like you're not gonna like all the stories, and it wasn't something that I really nailed down until I read a couple of them. Like, I remember I first read How Long Till Black Future Month by N.K. Jemisin. I was like, oh, this is like a 4-star. And then I was reading more and more short story anthologies, and I realized that, like, in my head, like, the N.K. Jemisin one was kind of like the standard I was comparing everything else to. A similar thing happened with me with Sunspot Jungle Volume 1, edited by Bill Campbell, or Two Moon Stories by Krystal Smith, or Filter House by Nisi Shawl. I would read other short stories anthologies, and I'd be like, this is nice, but like, how does it compare to like those anthologies? Then I realized like, oh, those are like 5 stars for me. But I didn't like every single story in there. For me, a 5-star short story anthology, I like 75% of the stories in there. 4 stars is I like about 66% of the stories in there. 3 stars is like I liked 50% of the stories in there. 1 star is like none of them were good. 2 stars, somewhere between none of them and 50 were good. So I had a 2-tiered system for talking about the stories in an anthology. I had highlights, which were my absolute favorites, and then honorable mentions, which were ones that didn't quite make the cut. And I realized that was kind of a flawed system for talking about it because I had like a very set type of short story that I liked, and there would be other short stories that were like fun and that like I enjoyed. There wasn't really anything wrong with them, but just because it didn't fall into like this certain format that I liked, and I wasn't having a certain emotional reaction to it, I wasn't rating it as highly. So I don't really use the highlights and honorable mention system as much anymore. The short stories I really like tend to get like a very strong emotional reaction for me. They end on like a very hard-hitting note. There's like sort of a sense of finality or closure at the end. It feels like a full, complete story. I love a short story with a twist, a good reveal. And I tend to like stories that were like more dramatic or that were like funny. I tended to like stories with like a more grim edge to them. So that's how I rate on Goodreads. But how does reviewing work for you? Do you give half stars? How useful do you find the 5-star system? Thanks for watching. Have a good one. Goodbye.